Today, we're going to be talking to Lily Ray, Senior Director SEO and Head of Organic Research at Amsive Digital. Lily is a really respected SEO across the industry. If you haven't seen her or followed her content yet, I highly suggest doing that on Twitter. She specifically brings research and expertise, no pun intended, around the EEAT vertical, or expertise, experience, authority, and trust in the SEO world. She's got a lot of clients in that health and wellness arena and brings expert insights for sure. In our specific conversation today, we're going to be talking through the recent search engine announcements from Bing and Google in terms of their Bard on Google and Bing specific AI integration, what we think it means for the future of search generally, and then dovetails into a conversation about AI content specifically. Should you be using it? Who does it make sense for? What use cases does it make sense for and not? And how we're recommending clients use it today, if at all. She also dives into a few case studies of success and failure in using it. I think that's an interesting piece for sure. And at the end, we kind of wrap it up and make some predictions about where the world continues and progresses from this AI point of view. So it was a good combo. As one final note, no application to this specific conversation, but there are some points where Lily sounds a little like a robot. Hopefully that's not a coincidence, but it seems like some feedback from our mic. Overall, very listenable and good quality, but there are some moments of AI soundiness to it. So I'm pretty confident Lily is not AI, despite being really smart. Her content quality is much too high for that. But I hope you enjoy the combo and see you on the other side. A lot of news this week about how things have evolved in the search engines in terms of incorporating AI. I know you've been following that closely, both from Bing's integration, additional search engines that are not as prominent in integration, of course, the big daddy Google's news about that. So starting there, a lot has been happening. What is your current thoughts of like where we stand and how these initial rollouts or announcements of integration of AI or the more prominent integration of these search engines?
Yeah, it's been like probably one of the most exciting weeks in our industry in a really long time. It's pretty interesting to see how things have panned out, in terms of like Microsoft's announcement went really well for them, all things considered. And it brought a lot of renewed attention to Bing, which I think was a curveball not a lot of us were expecting for 2023. I kind of love it. I think it's great that there's some new renewed competition for Google and not the competition we were expecting, right? Earlier this year it was like TikTok and ChatGPT, and I was like, this is a really interesting moment. Google of course had its own release this week, which didn't quite go as well for them. So it's just kind of interesting watching like an arms race between these two companies. And then of course, like you mentioned, the lesser known search engines are also innovating in many ways as well. So it's just impossible to know at this point how it's all going to shape out. But I think it's been an interesting week because I don't think a lot of us could have anticipated that it would turn out this way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that I know you touched on, I think I saw that you weren't excited about it either, that Google didn't seem to link out to citations in their announcement of it. And whether or not they go there, I'm curious how you feel about the future as it comes to this kind of integration and like SEO. Like, do you think a lot of our traffic will get eaten up? Are you more optimistic? Seeing this first wave, like what is your feeling of how that might look in a couple of years?
Yeah, I think, for a lot of us, this was pretty scary news. Like the mock-ups that Google showed were pretty scary in terms of what they could potentially do to SEO traffic, to publisher traffic. A lot of people are very concerned. I had several people reach out to me from various industries, like not only SEO, but like journalists, for example, like, am I going to lose my job? This is, it's just like taking the information we provide and basically taking it for themselves. I have a feeling based on how Google's announcement went this week, and also the fact that Microsoft and the other search engines appear to be really focused on demonstrating how their AI products are going to cite sources and are going to send traffic to publishers, and the backlash that Google received this week. I have a feeling we're not seeing Bard in its final form at all. Not to mention it's not even live yet, right? So we haven't seen it in any form yet. We've seen two mock-ups. It's also clear that Google is getting pushback for not having citations, and I think they tweeted yesterday as part of the announcement. They did mention that's important to them. They want to continue sending traffic and having a healthy web or whatever. So, whatever like doom and gloom scenario that a lot of people are fearing, I don't think that we're necessarily seeing. It's not going to be the worst case scenario that people are imagining. It's not possible for Google to sustain that. But, to the extent that featured snippets and other SERP features have cut into traffic in many ways, probably it will continue going in that direction.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm sure it'll be just a new wave of SEO articles of how we optimize for those getting in those. I would
Right.
guess it wouldn't be very different than what we're currently doing, honestly, but in terms of
Yeah.
like structuring your content correctly and all that good stuff, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be any new shiny way to get into Bard, like different than how you get into featured snippets, like just create good content. But it is really interesting that Bard has already, with the two mock-ups that they shared with the world, already shown that it's not always 100% accurate, at least in its current form, because so much of what Google has been pushing in its algorithms and in featured snippets and with content quality is factual accuracy and is making sure that people are reviewing the content for factual accuracy. So it's very strange to see them releasing or announcing a product that's inconsistent with what they've been recommending for site owners for years.
Yeah.
That part's pretty weird to me.
Yeah, it is a unique scenario where previously you can their goal is to surface the right answer, but if it was somewhat incorrect, that wasn't necessarily on them. But now in this context
Right.
where you're writing it, it's on you. You've like essentially said, I created this and you got to get that. And that's where a lot of that backlash has come from, it seems like, in many ways.
Yeah, and of course, ChatGPT is still innovating very quickly. Of course, like these language models are learning and growing and changing all the time. So like, we probably all sound really naive right now because in 5 years, maybe these things will be 1,000% accurate. Who knows? But like as it stands, with ChatGPT being publicly available right now, there's so many stories and pieces of like articles and news coming out demonstrating how it can be exploited, how it can be factually incorrect, how it gets basic math problems wrong, how it has like gender bias, like all of these things are coming out. And, Google has, I don't even know the actual like ratio, but I don't know, thousands more like sessions users per day than ChatGPT. Who knows what the actual number is, but many, many more, right? Significantly more. So when that tool becomes available freely on Google, what problems are they going to run into? How can they solve for all of them? Who knows, right?
Yeah, it's interesting just seeing the dynamic of obviously the the new startup that people are rooting for, and there's a lot more openness for them to be wrong and this chat GPT to be incorrect and not people be angry with them. But with Google, our patience is a little smaller
Right.
in general. And I think it's fairly correct that that's the case. Obviously, when money comes into play and like the risk of everyone's traffic is a big thing for sure.
Yeah. I mean, Google's run into so many PR scandals in the last however many years, 15, 20 years, where they've gotten information wrong and it's made the news, right? And they're very quick to respond when that happens and take down egregious results or featured snippets. Like there's obviously like feedback. There's so many ways to tell Google this information is wrong. And when they do get it very wrong in a way that's like racist or bigoted or whatever, it's really not a great look for them. So I just can't imagine how they're going to launch a product like this based on where we're currently at with like the sophistication of AI content, and it's not going to backfire. I would love to be proven wrong, but if the launch already had a factual inaccuracy in it, like, it's really, I feel like they're moving really quickly and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it
It's
shapes
not
out.
a good
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've never seen such of a dynamic. You've probably seen that screenshot, and maybe you said something about this already, of how much Google's stock tanked and Microsoft's stock went up. I've never seen it. Like, obviously there's PR backlash, but to actually have functional, like, proof that
Yeah.
this costs you technically billion, I think it was billions of dollars in market cap, was
Yeah.
wiped away from Google, to do it wrong. That's like
Yeah.
that's wild, and hopefully makes them move forward in their correct way.
Yeah. And like it's been I don't know that much about the stock market, but I've been pretty fascinated by the stock market's reaction to this different AI news. Like it seems like people are really paying attention. Like when BuzzFeed disclosed that to start using ChatGPT, its stock like surged. Like it's like investors are paying attention. I don't know that they necessarily understand the complexities of these things, but
Yeah.
there's definitely a shiny new toy in town, and people want to see it being used smartly and correctly. So Microsoft is a good example. Like they played their cards right this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to have, this is not financial advice, but I used to have a play where I invested in Google, and it would be like a little bit of a hedge where it'd be like, yeah, if Google spends so much on PPC or whatever, um, or like if PPC eventually, or like they eventually eat all of our SEO traffic, at least I probably would have benefited from the Google stock going up.
Right.
And in some
Exactly.
ways, I actually recently sold Google stock. Not like this week, but I've been a Microsoft stock holder too. And I'm like, maybe actually the now hedge is Microsoft, of like, if all this stuff changes, but
Yeah.
hopefully it's all not going away,
Yeah.
as our first conversation went,
Yeah.
for sure. When the dust settles from this week and I see what Bing rolled out, obviously it's just a very early thing, and I think there's a lot of excitement of what ChatGPT was generally. What it translates to in terms of search engine, I don't, it's a nice addition to me, but do you think Google should still have that urgency? I just seems like an add-on. Maybe I'm just,
Yeah. Yeah. I have so many strong opinions about this. Like I think I was just talking to my team about this. I think it would have been more interesting or a better move on Google's part, just my own opinion, if they said, you know what, we have this technology. It's not ready to go public yet. We're working on making it ready, but like we're not even going to come close to sharing it until it's ready, because you're all about to find out what happens when you launch something like this and it's not ready. Like people have already been playing with Bing's new chatbot in the last 48 hours and surfacing all these factual inaccuracies, all these problems, exploiting it in different ways. So like it's a really cool shiny new toy, but I don't know that it's going to be worth any potential damage to the reputation if it comes up with something horribly, incorrect, some type of misinformation that like, circulates through society. Like who knows what's going to happen? But um, yeah, uh, again, it's like they're listening to the feedback. Microsoft's had a really great week. There's a lot of like really there's people sharing things that are like, oh, this is extremely helpful. I think it looks a little bit busy. I don't know that I would naturally gravitate towards using something like that above doing a search, because I personally like to click on websites. But I think that's another thing too. It's going to take the average user probably a really long time to potentially change their search behavior. So yeah, not an
yeah.
existential threat just yet, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree with that. One take I read yesterday that I liked a lot, from Scott Stevenson. He essentially said that, like, we used to have a version of this in Ask Jeeves and Wolfram Alpha that essentially answered your question, and it was essentially a novelty. Like, we don't really ask complex trivia questions to a search engine. We use it like a phone book.
Exactly.
And that made it, I like that a lot, and seems like a reasonable take of where this might go. But yeah, kind of like transitioning to the other side rather than search engines, but how all this AI content factors into our day-to-day work. Obviously, the other existential threat is how AI can be used to very quickly create content through ChatGPT or your tool of choice on your website. You put out a recent great post, the role of AI content in SEO. I suggest checking that out on Amsive Digital. Did I get that correct?
Yeah.
Website where she breaks down all of that thought process. But yeah, could you kind of explain your current take on that and how you think people should be thinking about using that, if at all, on their website?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this conversation to me is more interesting and like, I don't know, there's a lot more to talk about here because it's like what's already happening, and it very ties very closely into what Google's been talking about with EEAT and content quality for a long time. And I also think it's interesting that they put out their new and kind of only official statement about AI content right in the middle of all of this chaos. So I think it was like 2 days ago that they just kind of quietly published that, answering a lot of people's questions about whether AI content is okay for SEO. They finally directly told us. That was a very interesting article because, and I wrote about it. So, like, my article was all about that. But basically, what they're telling us is there's nothing intrinsically wrong with AI content. So, that was a big question that a lot of us had. But there's a lot of caveats, right? Like, you have to use it responsibly. You have to not just rely on it to mass auto generate content for SEO, which I think is probably a gray area that a lot of people will find themselves in. You know, like once they figure out how to scale something like ChatGPT, it's easy to be lazy and just kind of like rely on that. And with Google's helpful content algorithms, that's against their guidelines, right? Like that's against their best practices. So it's a gray area. And my favorite part of the article that I think is like the ultimate checkmate for site owners was, we encourage site owners to think about EEAT, including putting author names on the content whenever possible. We also would encourage you to be very transparent with your users if you're using AI. And we don't think it's a good idea to name the author as AI. Like, AI is not a person. So they just created this like checkmate situation where you should be putting real authors' names or expert names. And those experts and authors now have their names potentially tied to AI content creation, which I don't know about you, I wouldn't want that for myself. And
I would not. No.
right, and Google's also asking us to label AI content, which like there's so many applications for how that would be helpful for Google to have that disclosure on the page, right? So I thought that was really like a smart move on their part. It's like, you can use it if you want, but you got to tell us, and you got to put an author's name. Good luck, you know?
And would you want to put
Right.
your own self at risk?
Exactly.
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, the whole thing's interesting, obviously, but I like that in the application of some of the use cases you outlined. I don't want to speak for you on some of these, of like how this might actually add value in a lot of the ways that I could see naming AI as having at least been additive to content. There are a few places that I don't think users would care, probably because there isn't as much of a need for EEAT in
Right.
that case. Could you describe some of those that you sort of talked through that you feel like there might actually be value add in using this currently?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like the AI content tools have really incredible capabilities. Like, I think summarization is one of the most exciting ones. So taking your own data and having it summarize something you wrote, that's still original, unique content that's potentially like in your own brand's voice with your own brand's data. So like, that's a great tool that you can use AI for. That's not creating completely new content based on what it thinks it knows, you know, but like creating lists, creating tables, like doing a lot of the kind of manual work that we've historically done with like HTML and structured data and CSS and things like that. Like, it takes out a lot of that legwork for you, so you can more quickly create like interesting assets for your content, which I think is really fun. But I just saw an article floating around today on one of the SEO publications that was like using ChatGPT for your site. And one of the things that it recommended doing was like, have GPT come up with 10 statistics about this and this. And I'm reading the statistics, and I don't know if this author knows this, but they're not always real statistics. Like, have you verified every single one of them? Because it's a language model. It doesn't actually cite its sources. And my favorite example I shared recently on Twitter was somebody showed, oh, you can ask it to cite its sources. And it created out of thin air Rand Fishkin's article about EEAT on Moz. And it was like, Rand Fishkin never wrote that. That's not real. It just created that out of thin air. I'm like, oh my goodness. So yes, it looks like it's creating citations, but they're not real. Be careful, you
Yeah,
know?
it almost seems like creativity in some ways is some of its best application where it doesn't need to be fact. But maybe it gives you a creative lens, whether it's like a title, like, as you mentioned in your article, like poems, songs, lyrics with
Yeah.
tweaking, creative ways to do things. It might be a good way to like spur some creativity, as it were, to create better content, maybe. But
Yeah.
looking for it for facts, probably not the best route, at least today, it seems like.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of how our team at Amsive is approaching it. Like this is a tool. Pretty much all of us have found ways to integrate it into our workflow that makes our lives easier and more efficient. Like I'm using it to create complicated Excel formulas almost every day. I'm using it to help start, maybe creating like a structured data JSON LD file about something. Of course, you have to go tweak it, but like that starting point is so helpful. And that's, I think, the most exciting application for it right now. Um, but yeah, relying on information accuracy, and I just don't know that we're there yet. And I also, there's to add to that, there's these new like scandals coming out about the sites that are using AI, and these journalists, these publishers are like ripping them to shreds. Like there was just one today that a site put out a lot of factual inaccuracies about men's health, um, because it was AI generated and a doctor reviewed it and turns out a lot of the facts are wrong. So that's not helping the reputation of AI content.
Yeah, it's risky for sure. As CNET saw very loud and clear, obviously probably regret putting the AI kind of disclaimer on there, although Google clearly advised to do that.
Yep.
That so costs them in terms of brand risk. I mean, it seems like especially at the enterprise level, and I'm curious your opinion on this, but my sense for like bigger companies on average, not only are these more competitive queries generally, where this is probably not going to add much value, it's definitely not going to add value, but there's might be ranking risk, but there's also brand risk now. So
Yeah.
that in total seems like it's not worth going to bat. But maybe for small business, it has a little more use case. I don't know if you ever think it makes sense for those kind of companies more.
I don't know. I'm pretty far on the spectrum of like, I'm the EEAT girl. Like I love recommending that sites work with real experts and real people with experience as much as possible, because I've seen time and time again that that's the content that ranks better. Like if you work with a real expert to create content based largely on their own ideas and their own experience, even without using any SEO keyword research tools, that content generally does very well over time. So that's what I've seen, and that's what we help our clients with. So it's hard to imagine many use cases as it stands to like, I don't know, to integrate a lot of these AI tools into that type of content creation. Of course, we talked about other applications where it does work, but like, we work with a lot of your money or life publisher sites. It's just not, it's, and it's interesting too, because like their brand, like the mission that they have is journalistic integrity and information accuracy, and a lot of people that work there like really do care about the quality of the content and what they're sharing with the world. So the people that we work with, and generally speaking right now, are very skeptical. Like they don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think many of our clients have really strongly pushed us on it. It's come up in a few sales calls how we handle it. I added like a FAQ question in our FAQ document about that we don't create content with AI. That's pretty much the
Right.
extent right now. I think everyone's interested but not doing much. But
I was just really quickly going to say, there are examples and case studies as it stands. I know SEOs, I know people in the industry that are having a lot of success with this, right? Like, I think if you look at the CNET articles, they did well for SEO. So people are going to point to that and say it's fine. The difference is we don't exactly know how Google and the other search engines are going to treat it. Like, they haven't necessarily released any broad core updates since ChatGPT came out, for example. And we haven't had the guidance from Google. Like, we can't just assume that because it's worked to date, it's going to continue to work. I kind of have a feeling it's going to get cracked down on because it's going to just be abused too heavily.
yeah, it makes sense, especially the people. I know it's essentially article spinning now for the people that they can actually clearly tell they're going to cover that. But I would guess the same indirect things that have impacted content for a long time will also impact this content. It's low quality, poor engagement, contributes to less links to your website. All that seems to matter. I mean, one of the studies I saw on CNET was like, it performs well. It is CNET, but I think they did there was analysis of them versus the AI content versus non-AI, and it seemed to be, and I could pull that up for show notes. It seemed to perform worse on average, which at least indicates maybe just the low quality piece. I'm not sure. I don't know if you saw
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah, I didn't see the actual performance report, but I did spend a good amount of time looking at the content because I was curious. Granted, I was looking at it after they made revisions because when these articles came out about how there were a lot of inaccuracies, they went, and plagiarism, by the way, there was a lot of plagiarism too. They went in there and made pretty significant changes. So if you read the content now, at the bottom it says, we've corrected this article to make sure it's accurate and we've reduced a lot of the plagiarism. So like we're reading it in its final form or current final form. And still, maybe I'm biased because I went into it knowing that it was AI content, but I honestly didn't feel like it was that good. It was very basic. Didn't have a lot of like great citations, certainly no expert insights, just very like, I don't know, like reading a dictionary definition of something as opposed to like real
Yeah,
experience.
something of quality. So you
Right.
touched on case studies a little bit there, and you said you've seen. Also, we talked about the CNA case study. I saw you tweeted something out, actually requesting AI like private case studies of success or failure. Have you seen anything else there? Did you get any DMs on
Yeah.
that are worth noting? Like, what are you
Yeah.
seeing out in the wild?
Yeah. What's interesting is like I think last year a lot of people played with these tools and spun up a lot of sites and tested things. Mark Williams Cook, he's been doing a lot of cool experiments with it. Last year, we know there's many different examples of sites that were scraping. People also ask questions, publishing content that answers the questions using AI content tools. And you can see almost every time the traffic and the rankings grew a lot and then completely fell off. So whether it's like a day that Google caught onto it or in large part, a lot of them were back to like the helpful content update or the spam update or even like the link spam update, which happened at the same time as the helpful content update. It's almost always the same pattern of like it works and then it's working. So that's a pretty egregious use of AI content. I think most people aren't going to those extremes, but I love seeing those patterns because it means that like you see this all the time, right? Like when people take shortcuts with Google and try these things to like trick Google, it can totally work for a while. We just don't hear about people like to take a lot of credit when these things work. They don't like to share when it stops working, but a lot of the time it stops working. So I think this year we're going to
Yeah.
see a lot of that. It's like, sure, it's working, but it's not going to work forever. I don't think it's going to work forever.
Yeah, it's an interesting exploit. It was one of my theories of the Google helpful content update, which I don't know that actually came true. That there's a kind of thing that could occur there where you buy a website that maybe has existing equity of some kind in the topic area, and you could just spin up hundreds of articles with that existing equity, and until Google has enough like time and data to be able to see that this is crappy content via engagement signals,
Yep.
you can see how it could rank, and that would probably be relatively hard to solve for. I'm not an engineer, but I could see that being a consistent issue that essentially affiliate niche site people could keep exploiting until Google can figure that out.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like how risk averse are you? Like with the helpful content update, what we know is that when I guess the majority of the site is now considered unhelpful, we don't know what percentage threshold that is. The unhelpful classifier gets applied to the whole site. So to your point, yeah, if there's a lot of great equity and you keep producing articles, you can probably milk that for a pretty long time. But at some point, it's going to stop working. So, you know, I think you and I work with companies and clients where we can't do those types of tactics. Like I could never. Um, more often we get companies coming to us because they tried those things with another SEO agency and we have to go fix it. Um, but like, yeah, if you're just in the business of trying things and breaking things and it's okay for you to lose everything and start fresh again, like go for it. Like it's not illegal.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe that's like a decent AdSense model for a scrappy solopreneur. It probably
Right.
is. I don't know. Who knows for how long? I know a lot of people are probably doing that as much as they can.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so you talked about is there any context where your clients are, so no clients are really touching AI generally right now? You generally have enterprise clients from what I understand. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think we work with a lot of different clients, and I don't want to speak out of turn because we do have like a whole content production team as well that's kind of separate from the SEO team, and I know that they're using some AI tools. One of the things we're talking about internally is like the ethics around this. So what I think is unfortunately going to happen is a lot of SEO companies are just going to start using these tools without telling their clients, and I really feel like you have an ethical responsibility to tell clients, especially because like with ChatGPT, it seems to be unclear whether you can use this content commercially, right? So if you're sending that to clients, like, are you violating their terms of service? That's not great. Um, but yeah, I think there are some ways that we're using it with clients. We're definitely not going so far as to create entire articles using AI, but I believe we're using it with some who have consented to like, yeah, that can like beef up the content a little bit. I think we're using Jasper, with some of the clients, but we're being very cautious, and most of the people on my team appear to be really skeptical about using it with their content strategies. I know that we're using it for like editorial planning, keyword clustering in some cases, or keyword like blog ideas. Like I think it's nice for those features, but not straight up content production in most cases.
Yeah, we're similar. Definitely not currently touching it on content. Thought about it. Using it for keyword research. It's been useful in our process for giving relevancy scores to topics for clients, like how relevant a topic is to a given client. It's actually very accurate at giving it a score as we would give it. That's been useful. One thing I want to keep an eye on, we have a big design team for our content creation process, is if there's an aspect where it could speed up stock photo sourcing. That's a big part,
Yeah.
not a big part, but it's a part of what our design team often has to do. And it seems like that could be helpful, although still a lot of those AI stock photos, I feel like they all sort of do have a little look to them, or at least what I keep
Yeah,
seeing
like
on Twitter.
six fingers. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
always like
that,
one
that
finger too
especially,
many.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then now we have like this new lawsuit, the Getty Image lawsuit, which is I think the biggest of its kind so far for like, these tools using Getty Image stock photos to train their models. Like
Oh, I didn't hear
it's
that.
just
Is that essentially,
yeah, that
yeah.
happened this week, I think. The first such big corporate lawsuit of its kind, I believe, so far. So it's murky, right? Like I certainly wouldn't want to end up being an agency that like kind of took shortcuts with the companies that we work with. So it's I like to be cautious and just make sure we're doing everything by the book right now.
Yeah. This is just a headline, maybe generated by AI, but yeah, Getty Images sued Stable Diffusion for 1.8 trillion. So they're taking it
Geez,
seriously. That's
trillion.
quite the number.
Wow.
Trillion. Who has $1
Wow. I
trillion?
did not know the
But
number was that big. I was like, yeah, that's like what? Wow. We'll see how that
wow,
goes.
that's interesting. It's almost like a version of Napster in a way. Maybe it's not the same, but that it sort of reminds me of Napster in some fashions, like all the music companies suing Napster. It's like we
Yeah,
sort of did this, that, but who knows if that stops that. Obviously, but the music industry evolved in its own way to Spotify, obviously, in a version
exactly.
for
Yeah.
creators. So we'll see how that works. But do you have any sense of like where things evolve from here? Obviously, this is so moving so fast. Like, if you had to make a prediction of like even what it looks like 12 months from now, maybe 12 months is the most realistic timeline. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think it might look like? How should people prepare?
I mean, there's two conversations, right? There's the one that we started with, which is Bard and the new Bing and chatbots. That is like, who can say? I imagine what I personally think is going to happen is they're going to, since they're clearly like duking it out in terms of like who can be the first one to do it, they're going to preemptively launch these tools before they're 100% ready, which I think they're slated to do in the next few weeks. I personally think there's going to be all kinds of different backlash. Um, and they're going to have to continue refining it and making it more like helpful and accurate in terms of the content, but also just making sure that they maintain a good relationship with publishers and advertisers, right? Like, you know what, like that's their business model. Like they need ads, so they have to maintain friendly relations with publisher sites. So that conversation, it's impossible to say how it's going to go, but I'm kind of like secretly enjoying watching it. I think it's a bit of a train wreck, which is kind of fun. I'm not super worried that SEO is going to die in the next, year. I just don't think that's going to happen. The other conversation about using AI in content, that's to me very interesting because it's such an interesting curveball as it relates to like expertise, experience, authority, and trust, Google's big thing. So I imagine most ethical, SEO consultants and agencies will probably find some ways to incorporate AI into their workflow, maybe into the content creation process. But, remembering that things need to be reviewed and audited and fact checked and like working with experts and doing all those great things. Hopefully, most people abide by those rules. But I, knowing SEOs and knowing our history and how we like to exploit everything, probably a lot of people will try to take shortcuts. There's going to be a huge growth of low quality, medium to low quality content on the internet. A lot more borderline spam for Google and search engines to parse through, and probably some really big core updates, if not helpful content updates, if not their own like new type of Google update aimed at addressing that. I think we're going to see that this year.
Yeah, it makes sense. They're going to pay close attention to this and try to solve for maybe some of those things we talked about to the extent. It seems like that super long tail is where this becomes most prominent, potentially, is like solving for that. Maybe sometimes this is useful above what's there. And in those cases, maybe that is what Google's sort of talking about in their update, that
Yeah.
AI can add value and be I do like AI for like summation of sports scores and stuff like that. Like if
Totally.
it was summating some like Division 3 basketball game that no one was going to write an article about, that's pretty good use case. And
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just like being thoughtful in that way.
Yeah. I think there's many, many applications for it that are helpful for society and users, right? So hopefully we stick to those.
Yeah, we'll keep monitoring it for sure. I have been thinking about doing summations of podcasts. I like that thought process of, obviously it's good at summarizing things. So if we're going to summarize something, probably would be a good, that's what this is actually a good use of this tool is. So maybe we'll have this summarized by AI. If you look in the show notes, we'll see.
Yeah, I actually talked about doing that with our teens. Yeah, like internal meetings, just like summarizing those and maybe doing little write-ups. That can be really effective. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Well, where should people find you, Lily? You put out a lot of great content.
Generally speaking, I like live on Twitter, so my name's Lily Ray NYC. But Twitter's sometimes a little unreliable these days, so you can use LinkedIn. If you Google my name, all kinds of different places you can find me. So my name's just Lily Ray.
Are you? What's your thoughts? Final thoughts on Mastodon and how do you think that's still worth spending time on?
It's hard. I enjoyed moving to Mastodon. I enjoyed seeing the community kind of shift over there, but with Twitter shutting down API access, I don't know if that's the thing that did it, but I was using a tool that published to Twitter and Mastodon simultaneously, which made it much more enjoyable for me because obviously that's less effort on my part. I don't have time to be tweeting and what do they call it? Tooting. They call it tooting on Mastodon. I don't have time to be tweeting and tooting all day. I can certainly do one. I can't do both, but ever since that got cut off, it's less interesting to me because I'm like, I do not have time for another social platform right now. So if Twitter implodes, we can all go there, but it hasn't happened yet. So
yeah, I didn't ride the wave, but I at least like signed up there, and I'm like occasionally poking in. But that was probably a good idea to just automatically cross post to both.
yeah.
But I feel like Twitter is going to be around. It feels like a very similar conversation. There's like this peak of panic and end of the world. It sounds a little similar to this week's search conversation, and maybe a lot of this. Sometimes it is end of the world. We shouldn't ignore that it can happen, but I don't think it is for Twitter, anyways.
I don't think so either.
On that note, Hopefully the robots are not here forever, or they're not going to take our jobs. That seems like the takeaway from this. And it doesn't seem like it's going to make a huge difference on search engines directly, or at least short term, but really appreciate your insight, Lily. Definitely check out all her content. She's a great follow on Twitter for sure. Highly recommend that. If you're listening to this, make sure you do that. Great insights on EEAT in particular. That's your go-to and expertise for sure amongst many other SEO things. So I appreciate you coming on, Lily.
Yeah, thanks for having me.